People, yeah, they will use something that is built on top of generators without learning generators. They will use something that's built on top of proxies and not know what proxies are. So again, you don't have to understand all the internals to be productive with a tool, but it's good that you learn some of them. After 4 or 5 development sprints, get one sprint just to plan on how to address technical debt or how to innovate in technology, how to bring that one, how to build a POC. I think that these days is
JavaScript,
getting
yeah.
even worse because people are nowadays are learning Next even before they learn React itself, or they learn Next before they learn Vue. A lot of what we do in scheduling, like the whole concept of fibers, of coroutines, or effect handlers, and a lot of things that React either does or is inspired by, they are not React concepts. They are, some of them you even saw them in operating system classes in university. Suspense was going to work by throwing promises underneath that are then captured by React. So that's how you could build suspense compatible libraries and stuff. And I was extremely amazed by that because it kind of, he was, of course, not predicting the future, but it felt like he was just by looking at the source and following the PRs, the RFCs. So I guess that another takeaway is that works for me is watching what's going on in the development of the
Mhm.
library.
Today's guest is Matheus Albuquerque, a staff front-end engineer at Medallia, Google developer expert in web technologies, and an international speaker who's graced the stage from React Advanced London to React Day Berlin, React JS Utah. And he's known for diving deep into topics like React performance, web APIs, and the intricacies of user experience. Thanks for coming, Matheus. How are you?
That was quite an intro. Thanks for that. Yeah, and thanks for having me. I am great. It's hot outside, and yeah, hope
I'm
it's
I'm
good too.
actually excited to have you on here. I think you're the person I meet the most at conferences. So I think we did React Rally together, Utah JS, Frontmania. I think we've been to so many conferences at the same time. How do you like it going to conferences? What makes you travel so much and do it so often?
I think at this point I'm sort of addicted to them, but it kind of all started about 10 years ago when I started going to meetups back in my hometown in Brazil. It's called Fortaleza. And at the time, I had just many, many different learning threads open. Like I was trying to learn backend, I was trying to learn native Android, I was trying to learn web. And I was kind of like overwhelmed amongst so many information. And then I remember I was in high school and I attended my first tech meetup, and I met a lot of cool people, and I
Hmm.
experienced even some hand holding, like people started helping me with the topics. And then I started going to meetups, and then I started presenting at meetups, and then I started going to conferences and then presenting at conferences. And then it all snowballed into that.
Nice. How many do you have so far? I see behind you the badges. I like collecting them as well. How many do you have so far? Do you know, like
Uh, I
a ballpark number?
I actually tracked that in my website, so I think I've crossed the 80 mark at this point. So it's something between 80 and 100 events in total. Yeah. I kind of built a mini CMS around talks because I was super, super into trying to get statistics about then countries, cities, topics, all of that.
Do you know which one you visited the most?
I think at this point, that's a good question. I know I've been to a few in the States, and I would say definitely, besides Brazil, for obvious reasons, I would say the States, maybe Spain too. I've been to like 4 or 5 in Spain. Yeah, so States, Spain, Germany, yeah, and tons of meetups in Czech Republic.
So before we talk about programming in general, what made you like become a programmer and an engineer?
That's an interesting question. For me, it was a lot of being influenced by my siblings. So I am
Mhm,
the youngest out of my siblings, and both my brother and my sister, they went to a STEM high school or vocational high school. They also took CS or IT courses as undergrad, and my sister even got a master's degree in CS. So I grew up to that and looking at their books, like Java programming books, C++
mhm.
algorithms, and stuff like that. So I was always amazed by it. And then, yeah, I really wanted to understand that. And as a kid, I was like, how come it's possible that you type things and the computer does some output for you? So I was always amazed by this kind of thing. And yeah, so in high school, I started programming a little bit before high school. Actually, I was in the secondary school, or what we call secondary school in Brazil, and then I decided to go to the same STEM high school that both my brother and my sister went in the 90s, and that's where it all started.
Okay, so education-wise. And what made you choose front end? Because of course you could have done backend, Java, whatever, and you chose to like focus on front end more than other technologies.
I think it happened to be an accident. So in the thing that I told you about, like going to meetups and stuff, I
Mm-hmm.
really bonded with the local JavaScript community in my hometown, and I started diving more and more into JavaScript and front end in general. And I guess that the feedback loop I had building stuff was super fun at the time. Also, I really like, I'm not an expert, of course, but I flirt with UX a lot. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I guess there was that too. And another thing is I had hiatus where I did some native iOS, not only iOS, but Mac OS, Apple stuff in general, WatchOS, tvOS. And this was back in 2016 ish. And I really loved Swift. I really loved Objective C, but I did dislike a lot of other things in native development. Like I hated Xcode. I hated like dependency management and a bunch of other native problems at the time. So that pushed me back even stronger to front end. Like, okay, front end is really my thing. So yeah.
Nice. I think one of your core talking points is about React. We all love React. I think it's the most popular framework out there. And one of your talks that I really enjoyed was talking about how React does scheduling. What are your key takeaways that developers should know about React scheduling?
That's interesting because a lot of people. So I've heard, even I remember talking about this specific talk to Dan Abramov after React Advanced London, because he was there and he was in the audience, and I got super nervous. Like I'm talking about internals, and one of the core committers of React is here. I don't want to say anything that's not 100% accurate. And I recall asking for feedback after this session, like how did I go and this kind of thing. And the main thing he mentioned is that he disliked was that he doesn't love the idea of certain talks that they make people feel like they need to understand internals to be
Mhm.
a good React developer, to be productive with the technology. So the first thing that comes to my mind is it's kind of like a lot of people, they will say you should, and a lot that you should explore internals and dive deeper into how your tool work. But at the same time, some other people, and they can be making a valid point, they will say that maybe you don't have to. So it's a little bit touchy sometimes in that sense. Regarding takeaways about scheduling per se, so that's interesting. It's been a while since I last did that talk. But I would say that, yeah, thinking about, especially if you're thinking about concurrent React, it's interesting to see the technical decisions they made underneath it and how React yields execution back to the browser and this kind of thing, what kind of heuristics they use under the hood. This is
Mhm.
interesting to know. Also, one thing that I am particularly keen into is, and I even did a workshop diving deeper with examples and stuff, following up on that talk, is I think that a lot of what we do in scheduling, like the whole concept of fibers, of coroutines, or
Mhm.
effect handlers, and a lot of things that React either does or is inspired by, they are not React concepts. They are, some of them you even saw them in operating system classes in university, for example. So I think that one huge takeaway is to watch how React implements those concepts, or how it was influenced by it, or at which limitations it stops. For example, like JavaScript limitations, sometimes browser limitations. That's
Mhm.
another thing. And I think that the third takeaway, which is not even about scheduling per se, but it's relevant in my opinion, is the reason why I started doing this kind of deep dives and exploring the internals of React is I have an interesting story. So back in 20,
Let's hear it.
yeah, I think it was when Suspense was announced. So there was this React Conf, and I remember that Jared Palmer was the one introducing Suspense. And this was probably, yeah, 2016, 17, 18. Yeah, something like that. And I remember that when I watched this talk, I was at a cafe with some friends, and I asked one of my best friends, Lucas, at the time, hey, isn't this suspense thing the thing you showed me like 6 months ago that you implemented at your company behind a feature flag? And he said, yeah. And I asked him, how did you know about that if they're announcing it now? And he basically mentioned that he was following the pull requests at the time,
Mm.
and he knew that suspense was going to work by throwing promises underneath that are then captured by React. So that's how you could build suspense compatible libraries and stuff. And I was extremely amazed by that, because it kind of, he was of course not predicting the future, but it felt like he was, just by looking at the source and following the PRs, the RFCs. So I guess that another takeaway is that works for me is watching what's going on in the development of the
Mhm.
library you use.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And actually a really good advice for everyone to just follow the React GitHub repo and see what issues they have, what they're working on. They actually post RFCs there quite often. I think it's really, really interesting. I mean,
Exactly.
you
That's,
can influence the how the framework evolves.
yeah, and I tell people that nowadays it's far easier to do that, because again, there's a lot of community repos there. They have the community on GitHub. They tweet a lot more about that. Like 6 years ago, you really needed to dig into specific PRs. You really needed to spend some time navigating the source code on GitHub. So I would say that doing this kind of thing is even easier now.
Yeah, for sure. Another talk I really enjoyed from you, I think you gave it at Utah.js, about hydration, islands, streaming. Now we also have React Server components. What do you think about this? Where do you think we're going? What's the not the best? I know it depends on your use case, but what do you like using the most? What's your rendering strategy of choice, let's say?
Yeah, this is probably the classic cliche of it depends. And if, for example, right now, I maintain in my company, I maintain a monolith app that is served by a Java backend, and it's a React application, but it's routed by a Java monolith. So,
Okay.
and the data, and it reconciles data that is injected by this monolith, not via REST, not via, but this thing is scaled, like it was built like almost 10 years ago, and it's scaled to thousands of customers and millions of people who use it on a monthly basis. So on a monthly basis. So it's I'm not saying, by the way, this is not an architecture I would be proud of, but it just did work. So I would say that it depends, and I think that's why we see, especially in enterprise scale, we see so many
Hmm.
companies that we see so many apps that they have so many different strategies, within the same app because that's how things evolve throughout years or decades.
Yeah.
So
Each team chooses
yeah,
their
I
own
don't.
strategy.
Yeah, kind of this. So I would say that it really depends on what you're trying to build. That's why in the talk I mentioned this thing. It was a post by Jason Miller. It's called Application Holotypes. And I think this post is from 2019, 2020. And he would break down like different types of apps one can build. Like if you're trying to build an e-commerce or a social network or a web gaming platform, whatever. And then
Mhm.
he would discuss different strategies, not only for rendering, but for this and that, different aspects of the app. And I've seen that. I think it's a post or a video by Ryan Corniato from Solid where he follows the same thing, but he breaks down even more like, okay, for this kind of app, what hydration strategy would make sense? Or where do you want to
Mhm.
optimize? What routing strategy would make sense? So I'm more of trying to understand the problem, the ecosystem at your company, at your team, and this kind of thing. So yeah, I don't have
I
one
mean,
of choice, but yeah.
I think also the project evolves, right? That's why we get with so many strategies at the end, because at the beginning you don't think about problems you might have in the future. You just build a create React app, which is deprecated by the way, but you start with that and then it grows, it grows, it grows, it grows, and you're like, okay, now what? Right? You have web performance issues, so you have to fix them and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I've also seen like people what I call talk or conference driven development. I've also seen this kind
Mm.
of thing. So people were stable on a certain rendering pattern, but then I actually saw it happening. I remember when Next.js version, it was a two, yeah, they were in their two major about to go to three. And I was working on this project and like people making decisions they got really hyped about using Next because it would improve performance of this and that. And the thing is, at the time the ecosystem was not what it is now, so doing redux with ssr was a lot more challenging than it is nowadays, for example, and a lot of other things like styling plus ssr and etc. And I remember that we ended up migrating our stable client-side rendered React app to Next.js just to try to get some improvements out of SSR, but it ended up not happening and maintaining it became even more of a burden. So yeah,
That's really true. Like, let's talk a little bit about your project because I like this. The Java that renders the React app is sort of like how Laravel does Vue in Blades, right? Similar in a way.
I guess so. To be honest, it's been more than 10 years since I last did any PHP, but yeah, it's kind. I would say that it's kind of like what inertia does, but in a not perfect fashion. So it's kind of
Mhm.
like if you implemented a lot of inertia on your own in-house and integrated that into a React app with with your custom integration layers and stuff. So yeah, it's kind of like that.
Yeah, and I know your company deals with like millions of users and surveys, and I'm guessing performance is a really big problem for you guys, right? That's why you talk a lot about web performance APIs. What are some lesser known web performance gotchas, hacks, things that you can improve that you would recommend people try out?
Yeah, it's funny because I have a talk. It's called Web Performance APIs that you didn't know existed, and
Perfect then.
I basically basically I go over like monitoring APIs or stuff that runs under the hood of RUM libraries.
Hmm.
So, for example, which browser APIs would a certain RUM library used to check your core web vitals? So how are then even measured? And not only that, but also some sensor related APIs and stuff like that. So in terms of being less popular, I do talk a lot about these, like profiling APIs, for example. I don't use these a lot in my current app, but you can measure memory usage in the browser with
Hmm.
profiling APIs. You can measure with There's JS self-profiling API too. So there's a lot of interesting profiling APIs too. One of the things that is particularly challenging, I was even talking about this mostly last year, is not only bring the new stuff or the lesser known APIs, but also how to innovate and bring like established techniques like code splitting
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
this kind of thing, like virtualization, things that like a lot of us know about for years, how to bring that into more legacy code bases and code bases with the constraints of an enterprise, for example. And that's where a lot of magic goes. So in my talk that is specifically optimizing performance in this project, I got to talk about that. Basically, a lot of the talk is how to use code generation with JS code shift so that basically I could in one shot build two versions of the app. One of them that would be the stable version, and the other one would be a version that is feature flag protected. So you would only deliver it for the clients that are
Mm-hmm.
up to try these performance improvements. And with that, the modern version would use Preact, it would be use code splitting, it would use a bunch of the niceties, and the other one would be safe and etc. So fighting those constraints and the challenges of scale, I think that's one very, very interesting side of performance too.
And how do you measure this A/B testing? Do you wait for the 30 days to see Web Core Vitals from Google, the search report, or are you using RAM data? What's your go-to measuring strategy?
Yeah, so in this specific case, we use both synthetic data, so not only Lighthouse reports, but other synthetic data. And at the time this was first rolled out, we had App Dynamics, RUM, and eventually the company itself, we also had a performance team who rolled out an internal RUM tool that is built on top of Grafana and the Faro RUM SDK that is open source. So the company basically, we also build our internal RUM solution. So
Mm-hmm.
that's mostly how it goes for performance measuring. Yeah.
No, that's cool. That's cool. I've personally tried a couple myself, but yeah, building on top of Grafana, I think is the easiest way to go. And the more you have confidence because you built it yourself than relying on third party software, I guess. But what's your, I know usually when you do, you check Lighthouse when you do an audit of an app of performance, but what are some best practices you recommend people do so they are always performing? Like you said a couple already, like code splitting. I'm assuming use CDN for images, stuff like that. What else do you recommend?
So think um I think there are kind of like two big buckets you can think of. So of course there are some generic stuff that will like work for 80 or 90% of the stuff you want to do, like not code splitting. Virtualization is something that I've used a lot in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
places. So in my project, for example, we use virtualization with React Virtuoso, but there are a lot of other known and very popular virtualization libraries out there. Even TenStack, they got a virtualization library these
Yeah,
days too. I
they do
still
it.
haven't pushed this one to production. Yeah, virtualization for when you have large sets of data. Yeah.
How large? Like when is the moment you switch from a for loop to virtualization? What do you think?
So that usually depends on how users are perceiving your app. So in
Mm-hmm.
our current case, so in my company, I myself, I have two cases. So one of them is in the surveys app we have in the main surveys app. That is the one I maintain. And this one was basically, we had, think of a combo box or a drop down, and
Mm-hmm.
we started getting reports that this was crashing in Safari. When
Yeah.
we started profiling it, but Safari for iOS, on the MacBook, it would still be fine. But when we started
Mm-hmm.
profiling, we figured that this one specific client, they were, because we have like our builder where basically you can add different kinds of questions and different options and etc. And this particular client, which was a big client, by the way, they had this one drop down with 16,000 options. So it was pretty
Okay. Wow.
obvious why. Yeah. And the thing is, when we built this as a functionality, as a capability, we were never accounting that people would end up with so many options on a drop down. So this one was the thing that prompted us to, and this was a bigger revamp of the drop down, because it was not only about not crashing, but we also needed to improve the UX around it. So we added searching capability and stuff like that. So this was one of the things that
Mm-hmm.
prompted us into that. Another thing is I've been working recently on an internal dashboards for product managers and other people to see cross client information. And we have like we have a few thousand clients. So think of in a dashboard where we're rendering um, a lot of information for so many clients. I've also used virtualization. So in my current company, we have these two cases. There is this project which, back when I was working at a consultancy company here in Czech Republic, there was one of their clients is a Czech startup, by the way. They are called Life Penalty. They are basically a football game. And the thing
Mm.
is, in the admin panel, there was a moderator, because they run live events where people are playing football on like online, and there's a moderator presenting a live event and stuff. And this moderator had a live dashboard with statistics and the messages. And as a live event, they had like people playing at the same time during an event and sending messages and stuff like that. So the performance of the chat and other live data was also super critical. So one of the things we employed was virtualization. So it's a lot of times I've not started with it, but rather when the scale showed and it became a problem, we adopted it. And some other times, like
Mm.
this internal dashboard I told you about, that from day zero, I know I will be rendering this amount of columns, this amount of rows, then start with it. So these
Mm.
are, going back to your original question of techniques. There's this, and at the same time, I think there are super niche techniques that one can also use. For example, 8 years ago, I was working, about 8 years ago, I was working in one of the most interesting apps and most challenging apps I've ever built. Not because it had millions of users, it actually had just a few, but it was a dashboard that contained a lot of data. It was an asset curation platform with demographics, analytics, and so a lot of data. It had a lot of data plotted to a map. So we basically had around 100K data points plotted to a Mapbox map, because it was like the whole North America, mostly the US, and
Mm-hmm.
etc. And at the time, we also used a lot of optimization driven for maps. For example, Mapbox, they have this thing called PBF, which is an implementation of protocol buffers driven for maps, like targeting maps. So there was this, and also a few other things we used. We had a lot of complex math running and calculations running in browser related to the tile sets and things like this. So we offloaded that to web workers. So in my opinion, was one of my favorite use cases of web workers, to be honest. So yeah, there are a
Yeah,
lot
that's
of
pretty cool.
generic things. Yeah, there are some generic things like workers, uh, dynamic imports, virtualization. There will be things that are also niched to what you're building, like PBF.
Yeah, I think it's good advice if you have like really hard computations to move them to web workers to free up the main thread. I think that's pretty cool. I
Which
also had the
is,
problem with list when I was doing.
yeah, go ahead.
We had this drop down. We had this drop down with locations, and at first we had, I don't know, 1,000 locations, but we had a cron in the background that were getting more jobs, and each job that had a different location, we added to location table in RDB. So little by little, our drop down from 1,000 grew to like 100,000, and it became so
Oh my
hard.
god.
We had search in the drop down, but you would press a key and it will last you 5 seconds until you would actually filter. So it got so bad that we had to implement, virtualization and pagination, so we don't render 150,000 rows in a dropdown when you click. So yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes you also end up with things like throttling or debouncing the events too, or even now with React, you also have transitions. So yeah, you also have to sometimes have creative things related to scheduling too, and how you're gonna schedule a certain task. Yeah.
You're also a mentor at tech labs. I guess you're a staff engineer. You have to like coach people or, show them best practices. So what common challenges do you see new developers facing in today's world, and how would you advise them?
Yeah, it's tricky that you said today's world because now we even have the advance of AI and stuff. I think like
Of course.
whatever challenges we had before, they are even different now. But at tech labs, and sometimes I also see this when I'm mentoring devs mostly, or sometimes mid-level devs in my company, I feel like sometimes it's tricky to scope what you're trying to build. So that's one thing
Mm-hmm.
that I really try to work a lot with them, and especially at Tech Labs, because for context, Tech Labs is this NGO that started in Germany, but now they're in a lot of places. And I've mentored like, and they work with semesters. So every new semester they have like a new batch of students, and they gather students from different techs, like tracks, people learning UX, people learning development, people learning AI or data science, and they gather subsets of students together to build something. So a lot of people, they have a very very different background that is not related to IT at all. I've seen literally photographers, or even there was this
Mm-hmm.
guy
Mm-hmm.
who was a pilot. He literally flew commercial flights. So people have different
Well,
backgrounds, and scoping what they'll be able to build at a certain amount of time and is super tricky for them. And I see this with junior and mid-level developers too, and being realistic, and also like even taking the technical decisions too. Sometimes people would jump to the conclusions before they even had metrics or something to back their conclusions up, because they had certain biases. So fighting biases too is also tricky. And yeah, so these are two big challenges. I think being afraid of asking them questions is something that I myself faced a lot years ago. Nowadays, I kind of like, I try to be the one asking them questions sometimes, so that will motivate them
mm-hmm.
to challenge, because sometimes those dumb questions, they even challenge what a lot of people consider to be known. They challenge assumptions. So this is one thing that I also do that I find to be helpful. And one problem that I think that is getting more and more exacerbated these days is that, but full disclaimer, I'm on the learn the internal side, but I think that people, they're jumping to learning their tool even before they learn their language. For example, this used to be a
Mm-hmm.
thing. People used to complain that they would learn Angular and or React before they even learned JavaScript. I think that these days is
JavaScript,
getting
yeah.
even worse, because people are nowadays are learning Next even before they learn React itself, or they learn Next before they learn Vue. So I feel like this is getting more and more exacerbated. They will learn, I don't know, they would, yeah, this is getting more and more exacerbated. So yeah, this is another problem
We
too.
had this problem with Nuxt in my previous company, or 2 companies ago. We had Nuxt and we hired so many people that didn't know Vue. And what they did is they just went and did the logic not in where they should, but they added it in middlewares and in proxies and everywhere that you could write core JavaScript, and they just did it there. And then it became such a huge hassle to maintain.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know, like people, yeah, they will use something that is built on top of generators without learning generators. They will use something that's built on top of proxies and not know what proxies are. So again, you don't have to understand all the internals to be productive with a tool, but it's good that you learn some of them. Yeah, at least in my opinion. Yeah.
I also like to recommend people before they start building something to just write not a full RFC, but like a one pager where they analyze the scope, where they think about different alternatives to what they want to do, what metrics they're going to improve, but very, very superficial, just so they really dive deep a little bit into the problem and the solution before jumping in and coding and wasting weeks with something that might not actually solve the problem.
Totally. I'm a big champ for RFC driven development too. And I have to say that sometimes I go a lot beyond the one pager, to be honest. So my RFCs, personally speaking, my RFCs, they tend to get really, really huge in size. Plus, I also like using some drawing tool to lay
Hmm.
out the flows and diagrams and this kind of thing. So yeah, I think that building rich RFCs is really, really good.
Yeah, that's it's a good practice to have. Obviously, you can go too far, and then you have an RFC that takes a month or two to get approved, and then you're just like playing with your thumbs, as we say. But I think you have to find a nice balance between jumping in and wasting too much time.
That is a good point. That is a good point. Yeah, like you need to find the sweet spot. And I don't know, sometimes when I start building one, I also try to get some pre buy-in into that thing. So I, even before I have a full RFC, I will pitch it to other teams involved. Sometimes I'll pitch to the
Mm-hmm.
PMs who are going to be involved in a month from now or something like this, just to do a pre-market research on how well received the RFC is going to be when it's there.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So you've been around for a while. What project or achievement are you most proud of in your career so far?
I take a lot of pride in the work in this specific app I built at Medallia. I wasn't the one who built it from scratch, of course, because this app has been running
Hmm.
for like just the React app has been running for 9 years now. So, but the skill of it is something that really amazes me. Like, especially when I check the RUM tool and I see the list of browsers, I see Nokia devices, BlackBerry devices, Samsung Tizen. So very, very niched proprietary browsers and devices opening that one app. And again, I'm talking like dozens of millions of people opening, like answering those surveys in a month. And I find it really interesting the kind of challenges that the scale of this app imposes. For example, accessibility, because it like when you have so many people using your app, you kind of end up with a Cartesian product of every area where things can go wrong in every context where things can go wrong. So
Hmm.
accessibility, internationalization, all of these things that can go wrong, they will go wrong for someone in some part of the planet using something. So we've had all
For
sorts
sure.
of crazy internationalization things, like some fonts that were not rendering properly on in Tamil, which is a language spoken in part of India, or some characters that were not being properly counted in Korean and other languages. And then we started to have to think about graphemes or with accessibility, for example, something that was not being properly announced with this screen reader in this operating system in this browser, or some language that was not working for this screen reader in this operating system. So all this sort of problems is super interesting, or even performance wise. Okay, why are these pages not loading as fast as they should in countryside China? So this is something
Hmm.
that I take a lot of pride. And there are other two probably that I definitely think about. So back when I was in Brazil in 2017, 2018, I was working for an American startup that was the one building those data visualization systems and asset curation, the mapping and all of that. And the platform for demographic analysis that we were building was super challenging performance wise. Like literally we like workers and protocol buffers are just one of the things, but did a lot of scheduling work there. We did a lot of other creative stuff that was super interesting. Not to mention that in this world of ad tech, from time to time, we would have hackathons to address specific challenges. And I remember one of them, for example, we were building a ad that was going to run in Times Square. It was related to Super Bowl. And the thing is, those devices behind those outdoor screens, they are very, very limited in memory, in resources, and the browsers that they run, most of the time they run only a subset of JavaScript, a subset of CSS. So they don't fully follow this, like they don't follow the full spec. They don't implement the full spec. And I remember that in this one, we SSR'd the thing so that then the animations and the whole final HTML was shipped to this outdoor, ready for it to render, and all the magic stuff was done via SSR. So for me, this was a very, very interesting case for SSR. So yeah, this kind of thing too.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wow, on Times Square. Did you get pictures of when it ran or things? Did you?
Yeah, there was a video of it. Yeah, yeah. I think I still have this video somewhere. But
That's pretty
yeah.
cool, gotta say. But when you've worked with things like this, projects like this, or projects at really big scales with millions of users, what are some funny bugs that happen to you, or outages, or not necessarily to you, but your team, your someone you know?
Yeah. So, like those crazy edge sides of internationalization, for example, with crazy languages, or not crazy languages, but things that you don't think of, that they break in certain layouts. Also, accessibility wise, certain things that they would break at a very, very specific zoom rate, at a very, very specific device. So this kind of edge case you don't usually think about. Also, one thing, there's one that is interesting, that is about 10 years ago in this, because basically we will allow people to customize their surveys with their own JavaScript, their own CSS, and their own HTML. And there are two layers where this thing can run. So they can write server-side JavaScript to manipulate information and things like that. And this code is executed by Rhino, which is a JavaScript runtime based in Java. So it's JavaScript running on JVM. And we've gotten, for example, bugs reported, but at the end it was just a customization code written by these clients or these admins. And the same thing on the browser. We've got things reported like this this part of the screen is not matching the contrast, the proper contrast ratio for colors following this accessibility standard. And then when we would check, it was basically it was, but then someone overrid, like changed the styling with non-compliant colors. And to be honest, I could be here all day. Like one thing that happened to us not long ago, like it was this year, we got this bug reported that a specific button was not working in Windows high contrast mode. And the thing is, I myself had never used nor heard of Windows high contrast mode, nor how it works. And the thing is, it works by changing, like it literally overrides your CSS with new background colors, with new foreground colors, new text colors, and things like that. And if you want to be ready for it, you actually have to use specific CSS media queries and also specific values for attributes, which are called system colors. So I never expected that to break. Like I never expected a certain mode of a very popular OS to change my code in a way that it would break it. But this happens too. And in this topic of customizations, I have one interesting story that is I even talk about part of it in one of my recent talks. That is about 10 years ago, we started adding jQuery automatically in case available automatically in case you wanted to write your custom JavaScript with it without having to import it yourself and do all of that. And the thing is, throughout years, some people who were not using jQuery, they started to write their code. They started complaining that it was adding to the bundles loaded, or maybe that version of jQuery was not safe for them, and they wanted to get rid of it because they were not using
Mm-hmm.
it. So a few years ago, we added one option that would disable it and no longer import it if you're not using it. But the thing is, this option never got popular to the point that everyone who was not using it would opt in for that, would enable that feature flag. So what we did is we started running static analysis. So I built this thing on top of Bubble that would analyze your code to understand if you're using or not, and then remove it if you're not using it. And
Mm-hmm.
we took a lot of cautions and everything, but when we rolled out, I mean, we imagine like we disabled it for more than 1,000 clients. So there were still certain cases of incidents like we thought that this one client was not using it, but they indeed were using. So this was funny, but I mean, out of two, not ideal, I guess, and totally not funny actually. But out of 2,000, not 2,000, but almost 2,000 people we wrote out for, we only had like 4 or 5 in total people who reported the incident. So this was okay at the end. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I remember I talked to a friend who works at Rover. Rover is like a pet sitting app.
Mm,
And you can leave your pets to people and stuff like that. And they told me like they have like 4 or 5 cases per year where the pets die while being
oh my
in a
god.
pet sitting. Yes, so they have
My god.
insurance for it, and usually it's the owner's fault because they didn't specify that the pet has allergies. But sometimes it's crazy how some things might happen, like if your
Yeah.
app doesn't specify some allergies that the owner put in and you have a bug there, uh,
Oh my god.
it
Yeah,
could have such huge impact.
that's more tragic. Yeah, in these times I'm glad I'm just doing surveys. I mean, it doesn't get that bad.
One process, you talk a lot about feature flags, and I agree that feature flags, I would recommend everyone add them to their ways of working. What else do you think really good companies should do, especially in the front end?
One thing I love and gives me peace of mind, and we have this at Medallia, but we used to have this at Citrix as well, is ring deployments. So basically phasing out when you're rolling out something, a lot of us, we have sandbox in production, but besides that, roll it out in different rings.
Mm-hmm.
The way you're going to build those deployment rings, it depends. It can be based on your customers. So like from your smaller accounts all the way up to your more key accounts is one
Mm-hmm.
thing. But yeah, phase rollouts of new versions of the app is one thing that I really love. For innovation, one thing that my previous company Citrix used to have that was really good, and also sometimes with Medallia we get to do this in my team, are innovation sprints, because basically we work in those cycles of developments that are like you have one per quarter, and those cycles are usually composed of 3, 4, 5 development sprints. And one thing we did at Citrix in my team, and sometimes I get to do at Medallia too, is basically after 4 or 5 development sprints, get one sprint just to plan on how to address technical debt, or how
Mm.
to innovate in technology, how to bring that one, how to build a POC. Not every time you get to have a full sprint for that. So one thing that we do, like at least twice in a year at Medallia, we have those hackathons that people from, sometimes even from different teams, they will sit together and think about a problem and implement it. So this is also super interesting.
I love hackathons.
Yes. So hackathons, innovation sprints, for deployments, ring deployments. We already talked about RFCs a lot. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but definitely RFCs too. And for UX, like things that are basically, if you're building like new user journeys, this kind of thing, there's a post, I think from 2018 2018, 2019, I don't remember, by Denmal. It's called Hot Potato Process, which is basically he presents this kind of like waterfall design model where the designers they hand over code the mock-ups to engineers, engineers build it, and it goes like this. And he presents this waterfall model, and then he talks about this potato process that is kind of like a constant feedback loop. So designers would talk to engineers, engineers talk back to designers, and there's a lot more
Mm.
interaction between them. So I also really like it.
And that's cool to know. I think it will help a lot. Even us, we're doing less of talking between designers and developers, even though we're like a very small team of 20 people. I can imagine when you have hundreds of designers and thousands of developers, it's getting
Exactly.
hard to
Yeah.
keep them in sync.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Like, what's one of your favorite books or multiple books that you would recommend people read to up their game in programming?
I really like static analysis and compilers as a topic in general.
Mm-hmm.
My motivation for that is like 14 years ago, or yeah, something like that. I used to be a lot on online forums, and
Mm-hmm.
in these forums, I met a lot of very, very clever people, and I saw them doing things with compilers that to this date I still cannot do. But the way I saw how their whole thinking process was shaped by being fluent in so many languages and having coded with so many languages and implemented so many languages. So I literally saw, for example, there was this person who basically they started coding in Swift,
Mm-hmm.
and because they were learning Swift, and then in the second week of learning Swift, they found two bugs in the compiler. And I was like, oh my God, I've been studying Swift for 1.5 years now, and I still cannot spot any compiler issues. So how was that possible? And then basically when I saw they saying, yeah, I knew where I needed to look for bugs, for example, or I know what to expect from a type system. So this kind of
Okay.
thing really impressed me at the time. And so you asked about my favorite. I even have a tattoo of one. It's called Structure. Yeah, I'm not sure if I can show it all day, but yeah, it's the cover of one called Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs. It was, I'm not sure if it still is, but it was used a lot in CS 101 classes. Um, and it's something that is really really interesting. Still in static analysis, there's another one that is also really good called Crafting Interpreters. I don't remember the name of the author, but that's interesting. And then there are some books for specific niches, like our friend Tages. He wrote a very
Mm.
very good book on React. um
Yeah,
to
Fluent React is called, I think,
yeah,
right?
yeah, that one. I got myself a copy over there. But
Same.
yeah, so for JavaScript, I'm a fan of the classics. So JS, the good parts, you don't know JavaScript,
Mm-hmm.
eloquent JavaScript, those are also good. There's that one that is also super famous. Read I don't think I got to read this one entirely, but it's called, but I read some good pieces of it. It's called Designing That Data Driven Applications, something like
Okay.
that. Yeah,
I love that
that's
one. Yeah.
another, yeah, that's another mainstream one. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, these would be some references for sure.
Yeah. I also enjoyed a lot learning domain driven design.
Oh, I think I've seen this one, yeah. But yeah,
And of course, some old, well, not old, but like the Book of Four about design patterns. These are some
yeah,
of my favorite, but they're
the
not like
class.
books I would reread. Like okay, I read them 20 years ago. I can remember some stuff, but I won't jump into rereading them for pleasure.
Yeah, sometimes what I get to do is check specific parts of it. But yeah,
Mm,
you read them once and they will somehow impact or shape some part of your thinking process, and that's it.
that's true. Okay, last question, Mateusz. I think I drilled you for an hour. I hope you're not upset with me. I think we got so many things.
Ah, that was interesting. I love talking about this kind of thing, so I could be here for another few hours.
Then we have to do it again for sure.
Yeah.
So I was gonna ask you have a really important job, staff engineer at a company that does billions of surveys. How do you relax? How do you decompress after a hard week of working, hard day of working, after traveling? How do you do it?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Uh you said one of the things, so traveling is something I really love doing. Even sometimes when I travel to a conference, I started the compression of that conference during the conference. So traveling
Mm,
for me is super fun. Sometimes even when attending conferences, my wife, for example, would join me and stuff like that. So yeah, traveling for sure. I love going to the beach, which is something I don't get to do very often living in Prague.
mm,
But whenever traveling either back home in Brazil or whenever traveling like popular beach destinations in Europe and stuff like that, I quite enjoy that. I am a big fan of beer and coffee, so going like exploring local pubs or when traveling exploring local pubs like the one I did with you back in the Netherlands, for example. So exploring
mm.
pubs, exploring cafes, this kind of thing
That's
is
very
also
cool.
something I do. And taking photos. Like I
Alcohol
love to.
helps for sure.
Yep. Yeah.
I like the beach now. I live in Barcelona, so I'm very close to the beach, and I try to go at least once a day.
Oh my god, I envy you
It
so
really
much.
helps. I can tell you, it helps a lot. Like just seeing the sea. You don't even have to like, even in winter time, like just hearing the sea, hearing the ocean, like calms
Yeah,
me.
the smell of salt and sand, I love it. Like, yeah, I'm from a coastal city, so
Hmm.
I grew up to that, and it's one of the things I miss the most, to be honest.
Yeah, I love it. Cool. So where's your next speaking arrangement? I know I promised any questions, but where can my listeners find you next?
That is a good question.
React
Uh,
Alicante?
I was gonna say that, yeah, React Alicante for sure. Yeah, I always love when I'm invited to when I get selected in the CFP to be there. So yeah, there's React Alicante, and after React Alicante, I'm gonna be in Porto, in Portugal, for a conference called Porto Tech Hub,
Oh, that's cool.
and I am gonna be. So it's crazy because I don't have anything for July. I don't have anything for August. I probably will not have anything for September, but then I got October and November packed with the conference season. So
Yeah,
there's also IGS Munich in Germany, plus some other conferences that I'm still talking to and making arrangements. But yeah, confirmed these Alicante, Porto, and Munich.
amazing. Huh? Well, I'm also in Alicante, so I think we're gonna meet up there, grab a beer,
Yeah, for
like we
sure.
always do.
Yeah, this is gonna be fun. Yeah, and a lot of our good friends are gonna be there too. Plus, this time I'm going. So I had we talked about the compression. In 22, I went there with my wife, and now I'm going again with her. And this time we're even taking our dog too. So it's
Oh,
gonna be like family fun in Spain.
what dog you have?
We have a small Chihuahua. He's
Okay,
like 2.5 kilos, super
so
tiny.
you can hold him on the plane, right?
Yes, yes, yeah. Otherwise, I would be super afraid of flying with him.
That's very cool. Well, thank you, Mateusz. It was a really cool hour. I think we learned a lot. Thank you so much for coming, and see you in Alicante.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and see you next conference too.
Thank you. Thank you. See you.
See ya.